This would not be a top documentary film video if I did not start talking about incels. Hello everyone. It has been a hot minute since I've actually thrown some meaningful and educational content out there, but today is the day that I'm going to throw out my fourth top documentary film video. I have a list of 10 documentaries today, and I might as well get to it. Starting off today, for my number one documentary, I chose My Neighbor the Rapist, filmed by BBC. The journalist did an absolutely excellent job executing this documentary, even though it was probably an incredibly hard thing to tackle considering there was a lot of rape going on, death, and plenty of violence. This video took place in one of the poorest parts in Africa. It was filmed in Deep Sloot, Africa, which is in South Africa, by the way. The one aspect that I really liked in this documentary is that they had a vigilante woman who targeted the rapists and brutally assassinated them. I know it sounds very vulgar and violent, but these men are an extremely dangerous threat to society, and their main goal was to spread HIV and AIDS. And these women were frustrated with all of the violence and death and rape in their city, so they decided to take personal action and start to fight against them and hold protests and rallies where they would attack the men who committed these crimes. And they actually filmed the bodies getting brutally assassinated in this film, so it was very brutal. It was definitely an R-rated documentary, but I really personally enjoyed it because it was so graphic. The second documentary on my list is Dave Gorman, Unchained in America 2008. Basically, Dave Gorman, who is the journalist and the person who executed this documentary, he came to the US to drive across the United States to have a road trip to not give any money to the man. And what I mean by the man is owners of multinationals, chain stores, and trademarks, and obviously that includes gas stations, hotels, coffee shops, so on and so forth. So his first plan of action in his documentary film was to buy a secondhand car from a mom and pop shop, which is what he did. And then he proceeded to start from LA, and his plan was to go from the West Coast to the East Coast. And everything was going semi-okay until his director that he went with, her back started hurting really bad, and she had a lot of medical complications in the middle of the road trip. And so then he decided to go. He was a vegetarian, and he was experiencing some mental turbulence, and he was getting kind of bummed out, so then he decided to go on like a fast food bender, and he started eating a whole bunch of burgers and chicken nuggets from assorted fast food chains, and then he started to violently throw up in the middle of his adventure, and that was kind of interesting to watch him fail mid-documentary. I kind of liked that because it gave it more of like a natural, more of a natural and organic approach to filming a documentary. It was realistic because, you know, as a human, we tend to fail occasionally, but for the most part, I would say that he was very successful. It was interesting watching him almost fail and run out of gas occasionally, and his car was experiencing a lot of troubles, and it was kind of interesting to watch him continuously fail and rely on the help from mom and pop shops around the United States. So the third documentary that I'm going to discuss is not found on YouTube, it's actually found on DW.com, and that documentary is Botswana's Heavy Metal Queens documentary. I personally was intrigued in watching this documentary in the first place because I do like heavy metal, as some of you guys might know. This documentary was about many women rebelling against a society that is structured along the patriarchal lines by gathering and enjoying metal music and having interesting and unique costumes, abiding to what kind of aesthetic that they're interested in. This documentary filmed them embarking on a journey to go and set off and go to a heavy metal festival. It was very interesting watching them get together and get on this caravan picked up by a whole bunch of other metalheads, because they were in their small village listening to Cannibal Corpse and slamming beer while their grandmother and small children were watching them, you know, blare Cannibal Corpse and slam beer, because obviously that is very obscure for Botswana. I mean, in the documentary, the families are saying that they've never heard anything like it. Sounds very obscure and weird and satanic. Some of the boyfriends of the Botswana heavy metal queens broke up with them for being associated with heavy metal music and being interested in going to a heavy metal show. So it's really interesting to see how heavy metal is taboo in some certain places. The fourth documentary that I want to talk about today is Hieronymus Bosch. There is a VHS documentary on Bosch that is voiced over by Brian Swell. I do like the VHS aspect of this documentary. I think it's very nostalgic and crackly and kind of warm. I like that about it. And if you guys don't know who Bosch is, he is a Netherlandish painter from the early 1500s. He's known for his fantastic imagery and detailed landscapes. If you guys don't already know this, I will throw a picture right here. He is known for his banger of an apocalyptic painting called The Garden of Earthly Delights that was painted in some time between 1503 to 1515. Honestly, what I pieced together from this documentary is that he was probably the first surrealist painter. After taking a really close look at the Garden of Earthly Delights, you can kind of assume that Bosch might have even tinkered around with psychedelics. Personally, it's probably my favorite work of art, and knowing how old it is just continues to fascinate me day to day, and I just really like this documentary. For my fifth documentary, I really enjoyed the Popping Up in Oakland 1 and 2, the follow-up. This documentary focuses on a lot of gun-related homicide in Oakland, which is in Northern California, kind of next to San Francisco. Basically, what I gathered from this documentary is that these are just the kids of the aftermath of the crack epidemic in the 1980s. It's really sad to see, and what I took away from this documentary is that Oakland is a very dark and scary place. I've been to Oakland multiple times and I can concur, and there is a lot of gun violence there, and getting a closer look through this documentary was very interesting and educational. For the sixth documentary, this would not be a top documentary film video if I did not start talking about incels. I had to include the Inside Incel, Alec Manassian, and Online Misogyny by The Fifth Estate. So this focuses in on the Canadian incel, as I'm sure some of you guys might know. His name is Alec Manassian, who killed a whole bunch of randos on the street in a van. A lot of people who look up to Alec Manassian and Elliot Rodger, they look up to this guy named Toby/Mark, but his YouTube name and online name is Egg White. And he's known for making these crazy videos that are pro Elliot Rodger and pro Alec Manassian. And for some reason, he has a huge fan base, and obviously that is incredibly dangerous and very obscure, so they were kind of picking at his brain in this documentary a little bit. This documentary basically just explains why Egg White wants to be the messiah of incel songs that are pro Elliot Rodger and pro Alec Manassian. At the end of the documentary, they actually kind of changed his mind to stop pumping out all of that weird, horrific, and very misogynistic content. And for the seventh documentary, I included the Boarding House Killer, which is filmed by Crime Stories. So people always constantly rave about how Eileen Wuornos was such a prominent female serial killer in America, but I feel like everyone is just sweeping this deadly ass 80-year-old grandma under the rug who violently murdered 8 people. Anyways, so this grandma, I'll include a picture of her right here, her name is Dorothy Puente, and she ran a boarding house where she would take mentally ill people in who were experiencing problems such as drug addiction, alcoholism, schizophrenia, so on and so forth, and she would poison them, and then she would bury them in her backyard, and then she would manage to cash their social security checks in order to advance herself financially. And this went on for a very long time until one caregiver of one of the people started to catch on to her behavior, and then she eventually was under investigation, and then they found all 8 of the bodies buried in her backyard. Keep in mind, this is just a frail little granny, so people were having a really hard time trying to make sense of the whole situation. And while she was getting arrested, in the midst of the whole thing, she went to go get a cup of coffee. She managed to flee the situation, and they lost her in the middle of the crime investigation. For the 8th documentary, I included the boy who tried to murder Trump. Yes, an autistic kid tried to brutally murder Donald Trump at a Donald Trump rally by going up to a police officer, trying to take his handgun, and attempting to shoot Donald Trump. He did not succeed, for he was tackled down by the police officer and taken to jail. I believe he is still in jail. For my 9th documentary, I'm putting a 2-in-1 combo, but there are many more on the internet that I'm sure that you can watch. This is becoming a problem because I can't stop watching documentaries on polygamy. It's becoming weird. Someone please help me. But 2 of the documentaries that I threw in here are One Man Has 6 Wives and 29 Children. If you just look that up on YouTube, I'm sure it'll pop right up. And then for the 2nd documentary, for the polygamy stuff, I included the Winston Blackmore, the Bishop of Bountiful, British Columbia. And those are 2 really interesting documentaries on the wives, interviewing a couple people who escaped, and interviews with the people, with the husbands who ran the whole goddamn polygamy party. To conclude this whole thing, if you are deep enough on the internet to get this far into this video, and I'm sure that you have probably seen the iDubbbz Full Force documentary. It has 11 million views on YouTube, and it is all about Airsoft Fatty. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's just an extremely overweight, talkative nerd who has a really weird obsession with Star Wars, making gross food, and making really poor covers of songs. And I'm not going to go into any more detail or explanation because you can just watch that on your own. But anyways, everyone, if you got to the very end of this video, I really appreciate you watching, and have a lovely day, and have a nice time watching some documentaries. Megan, over and out.